I want to share with you how to brainstorm a persuasive paragraph. Now, first of all, you should be asking, what is a persuasive paragraph? And I guess I'll start with what a persuasive paragraph isn't. A persuasive paragraph is not an informational paragraph. This is not a paragraph that tells you all about penguins or explains to you what happened in a certain period in history. This is not the kind of paragraph that you're going to write after reading a textbook just so you can see what information your student has gleaned from that textbook. A persuasive paragraph is a paragraph where you are trying to convince your reader of a certain point or help them to understand your viewpoint and why you believe the way you do. Writing persuasively is so important because this is how we can succeed in life. It's how we can make a difference in our world. Being persuasive means that we know who our reader is and we can anticipate what sorts of arguments that they are going to respond to and that they are going to care about. This is really important in relationships, in work situations, when we're sharing Christ with other people. It's so important for us to know what matters to our listener or to our reader. So let's get started. How do you brainstorm a paragraph? Now, I never liked brainstorming. The teacher would say, just brainstorm all the ideas you can think of. And that seemed kind of silly to me and pointless. And I never really knew what I was doing. This is why I teach students actively how to brainstorm. It's so important. So the first thing you need to know is what topic you're brainstorming. So in one of my classes this week, we did this exact exercise and we brainstormed why it's important to read cultural books. So the topic is not my opinion. The topic is just reading cultural books. And then I have to have an opinion. A persuasive paragraph cannot come down on both sides. It's not the pros and cons. It's not giving both angles. A persuasive paragraph is going to choose one opinion and prove that logically using facts and examples from life. Earlier students, younger students, are going to do this with examples from life and logical conclusions. Older students are going to do some research and be able to prove things with statistics, facts, and quotes from experts in the field. So it's important that your student begin wherever they are and move from there. So the opinion that we chose in class was that reading cultural books was beneficial. So the thing that we had to start to do was to ask ourselves, why are reading cultural books beneficial? Who cares if you read books from different cultures? Does that really make a difference? So these are the answers that we came up with in class, and I know there are so many more. But I didn't want to give them more information than they would have thought of themselves. So we came up with 4 reasons that reading cultural books was important. So you could learn about the other culture because it's helpful if you're traveling. You could learn about another culture, and that would help you see the world in a new way and understand things the way other people can understand them. We can learn about another culture, and that would help us to be more accepting and welcoming and not afraid of outsiders or not afraid to talk to people who are different than us. And 4th, by learning about another culture, it helps us to understand them so that we can tell them about Jesus. The next piece of brainstorming a paragraph is going to be everything you already think you know to be true about what you're trying to prove. So you just start listing. Reading books is fun, it's educational, it can teach us about a culture, we can learn about their food, We can learn about whatever we know to be true about reading cultural books. And what facts or things did we come up with in that list that could help us to prove our thesis? Our thesis is what we want to prove in our paragraph. So the next step after you do that, because sometimes the things that we know to be true are not true, or sometimes the things we know to be true might not be completely expounded on, right? So maybe there are things that we need to learn. We need to learn about more things in order to support our argument. Do we need to do some research? So we need to just start listing all the things that we might not know, all the things that it might be beneficial for us to consider before we write. So questions like, what happens if we're not exposed to other cultures? What happens if we only hang around with people who think and believe and act the way we do? Those are two really good things to consider. There are probably lots more, but those are the ones we came up with in class. The next thing you do is you want to organize. So we want to take the reasons that we have come up with and the questions that we have, and we want to put them in an order the way we would write our paragraph. So the way I do that is usually a table. Sometimes it's just a list, but I will say reason 1. So the first reason it's good to read cultural books is that it's good for travel. And then I need to ask myself some really important questions. It's not enough to say that it's good for travel, because what if our reader doesn't care? Why does travel matter? How does it help us when we're traveling? Maybe reading a cultural book about medieval England isn't going to help me traveling in the UK. Perhaps if I read about ancient Egypt, that's not going to help me travel in Egypt. So we have to consider, how is it going to help? Why does travel matter? What difference is that going to make in the life of the person who's reading the book? The fact is, if the reasons that we're giving for our thesis don't matter to the reader, they don't matter. If our reasons don't matter to the person reading and hearing what we have to say, then they're not persuasive in any way. So if we ask these questions, it's going to help us to show that our reason really, really matters. So we would want to add to the travel by answering those questions. And we didn't answer those questions in class because we didn't have time, but it's really, really important. And that's how we fill out our sentences and our ideas, by asking those questions of ourselves. Then I would say reason 2. We get to learn about another culture, and it helps us see things in a new way. So then we ask ourselves, so what? Who cares? Does it matter if I see things in a new way? Why do I need to see things in a new way? Maybe I already live in the best country on earth. Maybe I already think that I see things the perfect way. This is a good place to do that research and find out what happens to people who are not exposed to other cultures. What happens to people who are not comfortable with people who seem to be different than them. So we want to answer, what difference is it going to make if we can see things in a new way? And why does it matter that we see things in a new and different way? There's some really, really good evidence out there that we could use if we were doing research. If you have a younger student, it would just be about how they see the world. So it's really important to see things in a new way so that we can understand other people, so that we can realize that they are human, just like us. They're not other, they're not different. They have some differences, but we all have differences. And it's so important that we are able to understand that each individual is unique and wonderful, even if they don't look like us or sound like us. And then we want to answer, what difference does it make? So the third reason we had was that learning about another culture helps us to be more accepting and welcoming. Helps us not to be afraid of other people. Again, we come back to what happens if we don't learn about other cultures. So if we were doing research, we might find some information there. We might find some experts or sociologists who would explain what happens in cultures where they don't like people from the outside. There are some benefits to being homogenous, to just having one type of people. You have much less conflict. I would argue that your life is far less rich. So there are some interesting facts out there if you're doing research. But we can ask again, what difference does it make? Why would people be afraid of people who are different than them? What happens if we don't accept other people and we don't include them and we don't welcome them into our group? What happens to them? If we're more accepting and welcoming, then what happens? That might be a good proof. We can take that and we can look at both sides. What happens if we don't and what happens if we do? And both of those sides help us to prove this point. So now you have your outline pretty much set up for this paragraph. So then you have to ask, well, what else does a paragraph need? When I asked my students in class this week, I heard answers like 10 sentences. A paragraph has to be a group of words about the same topic. It is 5 sentences long. It needs to have punctuation. Okay, so we debunked some of those things. A paragraph does not need to have punctuation. All sentences need punctuation, but that's not what makes it a paragraph or doesn't make it a paragraph. It could just have poor punctuation and need to be edited and still be a paragraph. A paragraph doesn't have to be 5 sentences and it doesn't have to be 10 sentences. A paragraph can be short or it can be long. In fact, a paragraph is any group of sentences that talk about the same idea. So we have one idea in a paragraph. A paragraph needs to have a hook to bring the reader in, and that hook has to introduce the topic in some way, and that could be 1 sentence or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. It can be long. Maybe it might need a little bit of history attached to it. If you're talking about the invention of something, you might want to talk about what it was like before the invention, or about how that invention came to be. And that can be part of your introduction as well. Then you need to have your thesis. You need to state what it is you believe. Now, there's a formula for a thesis that we have probably all taught to our children. It is, this is true because of A, B, and C. And the A, B, and C are my 3 reasons, and this is why students think that there needs to be 5 sentences in a paragraph. An introduction sentence, or lots of them just start with their thesis sentence. And then my first reason, my second reason, my third reason, and a conclusion sentence. That's why they think it's 5. It doesn't have to be 5. The same way an essay doesn't have to be 5 paragraphs long. So we need to expound and explain and extend our ideas. So by answering those questions, the what difference does it make? How is that going to improve things? That's how we prove it. That's how we pad out our paragraph. If you are having trouble with your student writing the bare minimum, this is how you do it. You give them these questions to include in their writing. That will help them to really, really prove to the reader why it is important what they believe and why it's true. Then we need a conclusion sentence or sentences that winds up our entire paragraph. And if we're writing an essay, it might transition to the next one. But if it's just one paragraph, it's going to wind it up. It might have a call to action that asks the reader to do something. It might draw a conclusion from the entire topic. The conclusion sentence should not be, "The reason this is true is because of A, B, and C." This is not good writing. This is what we would expect and we might applaud when our student is in grade 3 or maybe grade 4. But by grade 6, 7, 8, 9, our students need to be using their conclusion sentences to draw deeper conclusions or for a call to action. So I hope you learned something today about persuasive paragraphs. If you have questions, please post them in the comments because I'd love to answer them. Maybe I missed something. Maybe you thought of some other ideas. Let me know how your student is doing writing their paragraphs and what they're most struggling with.